All right, so today we're diving into something that feels like it's straight out of like a political thriller. You know,
Yeah.
imagine navigating the complex world of Middle Eastern politics,
Oh, wow.
but not as, some seasoned diplomat, but as the father-in-law of a former U.S. president's daughter.
Yeah, that's an interesting dynamic, isn't it?
That's the situation facing Massad Boulos,
Right.
recently appointed by Donald Trump as his senior advisor on Arab and Middle Eastern affairs. So
Wow.
we're going to unpack who he is, his background, his connections, and what his appointment could mean for U.S. policy in the Middle East.
Okay.
And the big question looming over all of this, can he help fix one of the world's most complex regions?
Well, to even begin to answer that, I think we need to understand Boulos's unique position. He kind of straddles two worlds,
Right.
Western and Arab, with deep roots in both.
Yeah, he was born in Lebanon, moved to Texas as a teenager, and later earned his law degree from the University of Houston Law Center.
Interesting.
Not exactly your typical path to becoming a Middle East advisor.
It's certainly an unconventional background,
Right.
but maybe this blend of cultural experiences is what Trump is aiming for.
Yeah, and he's not just a lawyer, though.
Right.
He's also a businessman, the CEO of Isagoe Nigeria,
Okay.
a billion-dollar conglomerate operating across various sectors.
Oh.
And, of course, he's the father of Michael Boulos, who's married to Tiffany Trump.
Right, so that family connection is very interesting.
Right.
That business acumen might prove valuable in a region where economic interests are closely tied to political dynamics.
Yeah.
And as for the family connection, well, it's no secret that personal relationships have often played a role in Trump's political decisions.
Yeah, that family connection is particularly interesting because Boulos has been actively involved in Trump's 2024 campaign,
Okay.
focusing on engaging with Arab American communities, especially in Michigan.
Right, and Michigan's Arab American population is significant.
Right.
Could be a deciding factor in a close election. So it seems like Boulos is working to build bridges between Trump and this community.
It's a delicate dance, though, especially considering some of the controversies surrounding Trump's past policies and rhetoric.
Absolutely.
So how do you balance that?
Yeah, well, Boulos has portrayed Trump as a champion of global peace,
Right.
which might surprise some observers.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how those pronouncements align with some of the actions we've seen from Trump in the past.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and delve into Boulos' own political background.
Sure.
It's actually more extensive than you might think.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Early on, he was connected to Michel Aoun's Free Patriotic Movement in Lebanon,
Okay.
a Christian political party with a complex history.
Interesting.
And he's also been linked to both pro-Hezbollah and anti-Hezbollah factions within the Lebanese Christian community.
Wow. Talk about walking a tightrope.
Right.
That's the reality of Lebanese politics, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's a mosaic of competing interests and allegiances.
Mm-hmm.
And Boulos' ability to navigate these factions really speaks to his understanding of the intricacies at play.
And his experience isn't limited to Lebanon.
Oh, okay.
He reportedly acted as an intermediary between the Palestinian Authority and the Trump administration during Trump's previous term.
Oh, wow.
So that experience suggests a degree of comfort in dealing with parties that have historically conflicting interests,
Right.
a skill that could prove valuable in his new role.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've laid out who Boulos is and where he comes from. Now the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
What kind of impact can he realistically have on U.S. policy in the Middle East?
Well, to assess that, we need to consider Trump's own approach to the region, which has been, let's say, unconventional.
To put it mildly.
Trump's Middle East policy has been marked by a few key elements: the Abraham Accords,
Right.
the maximum pressure campaign on Iran, unwavering support for Israel, and a clear desire to disentangle the U.S. from what he's called endless wars.
Those are significant policy shifts with far-reaching consequences. So where does Boulos potentially fit into all of this?
That's where it gets interesting. Boulos has emphasized peace and economic prosperity as priorities for Trump's Middle East policy.
Okay.
But translating those broad goals into concrete action within the region, that's a monumental task.
And we're not even talking about one monolithic Middle East.
Right.
It's a region teeming with diverse cultures, political systems, and historical baggage.
Exactly. It's crucial to avoid oversimplifying the region.
Right.
Boulos will need a nuanced understanding of each country's specific context and how they interact with one another.
So let's take a closer look at some of the key elements of Trump's Middle East policy you outlined
Okay.
and explore how Boulos might try to influence them. First up, the Abraham Accords.
Right.
This was a landmark achievement normalizing relations between Israel and several Arab nations.
It was a major shift in the regional landscape, but some key players, notably Saudi Arabia, remain hesitant to join.
Why is that?
Well, Saudi Arabia has its own complex set of interests and concerns.
Okay.
They're wary of Iran's growing influence in the region, but they also have to consider their domestic audience, which is largely sympathetic to the Palestinian cause.
So it's not just a matter of convincing the Saudi leadership.
Right.
They also have to worry about how any deal with Israel would play out back home.
Precisely, and they're likely to demand significant concessions from Israel on the Palestinian issue before agreeing to any formal normalization of relations.
That's a tall order considering the current political climate in Israel, which is increasingly hardline on the Palestinian issue.
Absolutely, and this is where Boulos's diplomatic skills will be put to the test.
It sounds like a high-stakes game of chess with multiple players, each with their own agendas and motivations.
It's a good analogy.
Okay, so the Abraham Accords present a significant challenge. What about the maximum pressure campaign on Iran? How might Boulos's influence play out there?
Well, this is where his regional connections and understanding of the nuances of the Arab world could be crucial.
Okay.
He might advise on ways to strengthen alliances with countries that are wary of Iran's regional ambitions. He could also potentially facilitate back-channel diplomacy to de-escalate tensions while maintaining leverage.
But let's be realistic.
Sure.
The Middle East is notorious for its deep-seated conflicts, like the ongoing crisis in Gaza.
Yeah, the situation in Gaza is indeed a Gordian knot, with humanitarian concerns intertwined with political and security issues.
Right.
It's hard to imagine any easy solutions there.
Could Boulos potentially play a mediating role in the Gaza conflict?
It's a long shot, but he might try.
Oh, okay.
He could leverage his relationships in the region to encourage dialogue. Perhaps starting with confidence-building measures like prisoner releases or easing restrictions on the movement of goods and people.
And then there's Lebanon, Boulos' home country,
Right.
which has been facing a cascade of crises, economic collapse, political instability, the looming presence of Hezbollah.
It's a lot.
It is.
Yeah.
Could he be effective there?
Well, Boulos could be a powerful voice advocating for a more active U.S. role in supporting Lebanon's recovery. He might push for increased international aid, encourage private investment, or even try to find ways to limit Hezbollah's influence.
Right.
All while respecting Lebanon's delicate political balance.
It's clear that Boulos is stepping into a pressure cooker of a region. Can he handle the heat?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
The stakes are incredibly high.
And we've only just begun to scratch the surface.
Right.
Stay with us as we continue our deep dive into the world of Massad Boulos and his potential impact on the Middle East.
We'll be exploring more of the complexities, the possibilities, and the potential pitfalls in the next part of this deep dive.
Don't miss it.
Don't miss it.
And don't forget to let us know what you think. What are your expectations for Boulos's role?
Yeah.
Can he make a difference in the Middle East? Let us know in the comments below.
Absolutely.
And don't forget to like and subscribe for more explorations into fascinating topics.
See you next time. So, picking up where we left off, Boulos's lack of traditional diplomatic experience makes his appointment even more intriguing. He's coming from the world of international business.
Right.
A high-stakes arena, but one with its own rules and rhythms.
It makes you wonder how that business background might shape his approach to diplomacy.
Yeah.
Will he be a deal maker, a negotiator, a bridge builder?
Well, it's tempting to speculate.
Right.
On one hand, he might be more comfortable with direct negotiations and less reliant on formal diplomatic channels.
Yeah.
He might cut to the chase, so to speak,
Right.
focusing on building personal relationships and striking deals.
That could be an asset in certain situations.
Oh, yeah.
Where speed and flexibility are essential.
Exactly. Think about the fast-paced world of business negotiations.
Right.
You often need to seize opportunities, build trust quickly,
Yeah.
and be willing to compromise to get things done.
But diplomacy often requires a more delicate touch, a deep understanding of cultural sensitivities,
Right.
and a willingness to build trust over time.
Yeah, that's the potential downside. You
Really?
might miss subtle cues. Or make cultural faux pas that could damage relationships or derail negotiations. It's a tightrope walk, for sure.
It's interesting, though, because he's stepping into a region where personal relationships and informal networks often carry as much weight as official pronouncements.
Yeah, that's a crucial point.
Right.
In the Middle East, personal connections and trust are paramount.
Yeah.
Boulos' ability to build those relationships could be key to his success.
Think about his connections to both pro-Hezbollah and anti-Hezbollah factions in Lebanon.
Right.
That's a minefield to navigate.
It certainly highlights the challenges he'll face. On one hand, it gives him access to a wide range of perspectives and potential allies.
Right.
But on the other hand, it requires a deft touch to maintain those relationships without alienating any one faction.
Like he's constantly juggling different sets of interests, trying to keep everything in balance.
Exactly. And it's important to remember that the Middle East isn't a monolith.
Right.
Each country has its own unique history, culture, and political dynamics. What works in one context might backfire in another.
So a cookie-cutter approach to diplomacy just won't work in a region this complex.
No, not at all. He'll need to tailor his approach to each specific situation.
Yeah.
It's sensitive to cultural nuances and be a keen observer of the political landscape.
So let's get specific. We've talked about the Abraham Accords and the potential for expansion.
Right.
If Boulos is tasked with bringing more countries into the fold, who might he target, and what would those negotiations look like?
Well, Saudi Arabia is the obvious prize,
Yeah.
but it's a long shot. Their concerns about Iran are real.
Right.
But so are there sensitivities towards the Palestinian issue?
What kind of concessions would it take to get Saudi Arabia on board?
Well, they'd likely push for a freeze on Israeli settlement construction in the West Bank,
Okay.
a commitment to a two-state solution, or even the reopening of negotiations with the Palestinian Authority. It's a tall order, especially given the current political climate in Israel.
It sounds like Boulos would need to pull off a diplomatic miracle.
It would be a major coup, for sure.
Yeah.
But even if Saudi Arabia isn't realistic in the short term, there are other potential candidates for the Abraham Accords.
Okay.
Oman, for example, has historically maintained good relations with both Israel and the Palestinians.
Interesting. And countries like Morocco and Sudan, which have already joined the Accords,
Right.
could play a role in persuading others to come on board.
Exactly. It's about building momentum and creating a sense that normalization with Israel is becoming the new norm in the region.
Okay, we've talked a lot about traditional diplomacy.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier that Boulos might leverage his business background to advance U.S. interests in the region. What could that look like in practice?
Well, one possibility is encouraging American companies to invest in strategic sectors in Middle Eastern countries,
Okay.
especially those that have joined the Abraham Accords.
So using economic incentives to promote stability and cooperation.
It's a classic strategy.
Yeah.
You create economic interdependence and you reduce the likelihood of conflict. Imagine joint ventures between Israeli and Arab companies in areas like renewable energy desalination or high-tech agriculture.
Interesting.
It could be a win-win for everyone involved.
But wouldn't that risk entangling U.S. economic interests with political considerations
Sure.
in a region that's already volatile?
Of course there are risks involved.
Yeah.
But it's a balancing act, promoting U.S. business interests while also safeguarding national security objectives.
Right.
It's a challenge, but not an insurmountable one.
It sounds like Boulos will need to be both a diplomat and a deal maker.
Yeah.
Someone who understands the nuances of international politics and the art of negotiation.
Precisely. And he'll need to be adaptable and creative,
Yeah.
willing to think outside the box and come up with solutions that address the specific needs and concerns of each country involved.
Let's be realistic, though.
Okay.
There are significant factors that could limit his effectiveness,
Right.
even with all the skill and connections he brings to the table.
Absolutely. For one thing, he's just an advisor. He can offer his insights and recommendations.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the decisions rest with Donald Trump.
Right.
And as we know, Trump has a mind of his own and isn't always swayed by expert advice.
So even if Boulos has brilliant ideas,
Yeah.
there's no guarantee Trump will implement them.
That's the wild card in all of this.
Yeah.
We're dealing with a president known for his unpredictability
Right.
and his tendency to make decisions based on gut instinct rather than careful deliberation.
And what about the reactions of other actors in the region? How are they likely to perceive Boulos' appointment?
It's likely to be a mixed bag.
Yeah.
Some might see him as a valuable interlocutor, someone who understands both Western and Arab perspectives.
Right.
Others might view him with suspicion, seeing him as a Trump loyalist with limited experience in the region.
And there's bound to be scrutiny within the U.S. itself.
Oh, absolutely.
Some will question his qualifications,
Right.
while others might see his appointment as an example of nepotism.
That's unavoidable in the hyper-partisan world of Washington politics.
Yeah.
Boulos will need to navigate those perceptions carefully,
Right.
building relationships with both Democrats and Republicans,
Yeah.
and demonstrating that he's acting in the best interest of the country, not just as a family friend of the president.
It's a lot to unpack,
It is.
and we're just getting started.
We are.
Stay tuned for the final part of our deep dive into Massad Boulos and his potential impact on the Middle East.
Yeah, we'll explore the long-term implications of his appointment
Right.
and what it reveals about the future of U.S. diplomacy.
We've spent some time now, dissecting, the specifics of Boulos' background and his potential role in the Middle East.
Right.
But zooming out, his appointment speaks to a much larger trend in U.S. foreign policy, don't you think?
Yeah, I think you're right. We're seeing a shift towards this, personal diplomacy,
Yeah.
A reliance on these informal networks and relationships to advance policy goals.
So, the rise of the, insider diplomat. Someone who leverages personal connections and trust to navigate these complex international situations.
And it really makes you think about how we view diplomacy in the 21st century,
Yeah.
Is this a pragmatic approach to a rapidly changing world?
Right.
Or does it blur the lines between personal relationships and official policymaking?
Some might argue that it's a slippery slope.
Yeah.
Too much reliance on personal connections could lead to a lack of transparency and accountability.
Absolutely. That's a valid concern.
Right.
We need to make sure that, foreign policy decisions are made based on national interests,
Right.
not just, personal loyalties or backroom deals.
But others might say that personal diplomacy has always been a part of international relations.
Right.
It's just becoming more prominent now.
Yeah, think about some of the most successful diplomats in history.
Yeah.
They were often masters of building these relationships and leveraging those connections to achieve their goals.
People like Henry Kissinger, for example.
Yes.
He was known for his ability to cultivate personal relationships with world leaders.
Right.
Even those considered adversaries of the United States.
Yeah, and while his methods were sometimes controversial,
Sure.
there's no doubt that he was effective in achieving, significant diplomatic breakthroughs.
So maybe it's not a matter of personal diplomacy being good or bad.
Right.
It's about finding the right balance,
Yeah.
using it judiciously
Yeah.
alongside traditional diplomatic channels.
Yeah, I think that's the key takeaway.
Right.
Personal diplomacy can be a powerful tool, but it needs to be wielded responsibly and ethically.
Yeah.
And it shouldn't replace the expertise and institutional knowledge of career diplomats.
Which brings us back to Massad Boulos.
Right.
He's essentially a case study in this new era of personalized diplomacy.
He really is. He's the ultimate insider.
Right.
Someone with deep personal ties to the president and a unique understanding of both Western and Arab cultures.
So it'll be fascinating to watch how he navigates this role. Will he lean heavily on his personal connections to Trump? Or will he try to build relationships with career diplomats and work within the existing foreign policy establishment?
That's the big question. And that might actually determine how much influence he ultimately has on U.S. policy in the Middle East.
And his success might also depend on how other actors in the region perceive him.
Right?
Will they see him as a legitimate representative of the U.S. government, or will they view him with skepticism as someone primarily beholden to Trump?
Well, perception is everything in diplomacy. If he's seen as just an extension of Trump's personal whims, his effectiveness will be limited.
Right.
But if he can demonstrate independence and a genuine commitment to regional stability, he might be able to bridge divides and build trust.
It's a high-stakes game, and the outcome is far from certain. But one thing's for sure, Massad Boulos' appointment is a sign of the times,
Yeah.
a reflection of how personal connections and informal networks are reshaping the world of diplomacy.
And it raises questions about the future of U.S. foreign policy.
Right.
Will this trend towards personalized diplomacy continue, or will we see a return to more traditional approaches?
Only time will tell.
Yeah.
But one thing is clear. We need to be having these conversations.
Absolutely.
To be critically examining the role of personal connections in international affairs and to ensure that foreign policy decisions are made with transparency and accountability.
I agree with that.
So we've explored a lot of complex issues today, from the intricacies of Middle Eastern politics to the evolving nature of diplomacy itself.
We really have.
But ultimately, the story of Massad Boulos and his role in the Middle East is still unfolding.
Yeah, it is.
It's a story with global implications, and we'll be watching closely to see how it plays out.
We hope you will too.
We want to hear your thoughts on this fascinating development. Share your insights in the comments like this deep dive and subscribe for more explorations into the forces shaping our world. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive. Until next time.